Thank you. We may take our seats. Honorable members, allow me to express our sincere apology to all honorable members and also our starting this meeting very late with some committing activities. So I am kindly appealing honorable members that we come closer so that we are able to move on with our program without wasting much of our time. Allow me to invite the honorable chairperson for the Environment Committee, Honorable Matema, some introductory remarks, then we go straight into our program. Over to you, honorable.
A very good morning to you, honorable members.
Good morning.
From the Ministry of Environment, Climate and Wildlife, just to this very important session with respect to the climate change management bill. We have facilitators here present from the ministry and civil society who are going to be sharing with us unpacking the bill in our quest for one piece of legislation that will give us for some soft landing. So I will just make a quick rundown of how we are going to be conducting the business of the day. We are going to have PS T. Famba, who is represented by the Chief Director from the Ministry. He's going to be the first speaker for our first session. We are going to have Honorable Dias making some submissions on the bill.
After that presentation, we'll go into plenary, and Mr. Dingane and Shamiso from civil society will make some interventions. So that's pretty much how our program is structured. Once again, let me thank you so very much, honorable members, for coming through. And here is hoping that we are going to have some very fruitful engagements and interactions. Thank you so very much for coming through.
Allow me to invite Mr. Jakata, the Chief Director in the Ministry of Environment, to come and give us an overview of the climate change bill. Over to you, sir.
The Chair of the Portfolio Committee on Environment, Climate and Wildlife, Honorable Members of Parliament are here present today, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure to stand in front of you to unpack the Climate Change Bill, Management Bill, before its third reading this afternoon by the Honorable Minister of Environment, Climate and Wildlife. So, as I start my presentation, perhaps I'll start by just highlighting a few definitions that we perceived may need to be unpacked before we go into the nitty-gritties and the details of the Climate Change Management Bill. The first being climate change, because for me to talk about the Climate Change Management Bill, we all have to be on the same page, but we already know it. It's the changes in climate, which are attributed directly or indirectly to human beings. Kushanduka kwemamiriro ekunze, okuguquka komumo omkati. That's what we would say it as a beginning. Then adaptation, it means the process of adjustment to actual and expected climate change and its effects. Actually, it's all the processes, plans, and actions that will result in us living or existing even after extreme events associated with the changes in climate. Then climate change mitigation, which is normally given a definition under climate change, which is in the opposite direction. In climate change, mitigation refers to any actions, plans, policies that will result in a country reducing the emissions of its gases in order to slow down the rate at which the climate is changing. Then greenhouse gases. These are gases which constitute the atmosphere, both natural and human caused, which is anthropogenic, that absorb or emit radiation at specific wavelengths within the spectrum. Actually, these gases, examples are carbon dioxide, which we breathe out, nitrous oxide from chemical industries like several chemicals, for example, methane from waste, dump sites, as well as animal waste, produces these gases, which if they pile up in the atmosphere, they do not allow heat, which is generated at the Earth's surface, to escape back into space, resulting in global warming, which causes climate change. Then emissions, it means the release of these gases and their precursors into the atmosphere. Precursors are gases like the gas that is emitted by vehicles, carbon monoxide. It's not a greenhouse gas because it does not cause global warming directly, but when it mixes with other gases, it forms also carbon dioxide and other gases. Then carbon credits. A carbon credit means a tradable certificate representing 1 metric ton of carbon dioxide equivalent that is either prevented from being emitted into the atmosphere or removed from the atmosphere as a result of climate change mitigation. The example of carbon credit is to do with if we avoid using electricity from Wange, where every day, every time someone is putting in coal into the furnace that is emitting carbon and carbon dioxide, we end up using solar, for example, then it means we've, in principle, stopped emissions with respect to energy demand and supply. So what you've reduced in terms of demand from Wange is quantified to see how much would have been used in terms of coal in order to produce that electricity, and is measured in tons. So each and every ton is called a carbon credit. Then we go to ozone depleting substances. These are any chemical substances which destroy the ozone layer. And once this ozone layer is destroyed, we end up receiving more direct energy from the sun that can cause also global warming, skin cancers, eye cataracts, and so forth. So these have to be controlled also by the multilateral environmental agreements. You shall hear about registry. When we talk about the registry system, in this bill, we mean the Zimbabwe Carbon Registry as established in Section 12 of the Climate Change Management Bill. This registry is the repository of all the information on carbon trading in Zimbabwe. Then resilience, it means the ability of a system and its component parts to absorb, accommodate, or recover from adverse impacts of climate change. It means if we are prepared enough, we would still manage to survive. We'll be resilient to the impacts of climate change. I think we saw under Cyclone Idai how many people, how many lives we lost, how much in terms of infrastructural damages, livestock, among others. So if we plan very well, which this bill intends to do or to guide, then we end up not losing so many lives when we are confronted with these extreme weather events. We know where to put our people, where to evacuate them to, which structures, and how we modify our buildings so that they are not easily impacted by these climate change related events. So we talk about resilience. Then share of proceeds means the aggregated amount, this is basically from carbon credits, of gross proceeds a project proponent as well as the respective entities that will be in partnership with the project proponent receive upon the sale of carbon credits. So these are just a few definitions that I felt you would need to be appraised of before I get into the climate change management bill in its entirety. So into the bill, first and foremost, I would like to highlight the process that we've gone through. We went through all the required processes, taking it to the various committees of cabinet until it was approved in November 2023, this draft bill by cabinet. So the basic principles guiding the entire climate change management as outlined in the bill will include mainstreaming of climate change in development planning and budgeting, then measurement, reporting and verification and data sharing obligations for national greenhouse gas and ozone in inventories, establishment of the National Climate Fund, establishment of the designated national authority to govern carbon trading in the country, participation in carbon credits trading, then greenhouse gas emission standards, and finally gender mainstreaming in climate change, which has also been added to the principles. So straight I move into the objectives of the climate change management bill, which in part one of this bill itself. So this act seeks to provide a framework for adoption and implementation of measures for climate change adaptation and mitigation for achieving low greenhouse gas emissions, including the need to balance economic and social development and the protection of the climate system in a manner which supports the realization of all the rights of all human beings to an adequate living standards and the equitable distribution of the benefits thereof. In climate change, we say we think globally because climate is global. But when it comes to action, we act locally for our own benefit. So the main objective will be achieved through the following. That's next part, the next slide. Providing for the institutional framework to coordinate, supervise, regulate, manage, and mainstream climate change. Development and implementation of climate change mitigation and adaptation programs. Provision of climate change related regulatory frameworks. Enhancing the ability to adapt to the adverse impacts of climate change. Enhancing low greenhouse gas emissions development, and providing for mobilization of finance, including establishment of a carbon trading system. So, furthermore, the main objective will be achieved through implementation of measures to reduce the use of ozone-depleting substances. Ozone-depleting substances, these are substances that we use in refrigeration and air conditioning, which have got a very high global warming potential. So, and also ensuring that private and public entities comply with the stated climate change strategies and targets. Also, we need to ensure a just transition to low carbon and climate resilient society, and providing for the domestication and the implementation of the provisions of international conventions, agreements, and protocols related to climate change and ozone layer protection, subject to the sovereign rights and interests of Zimbabwe. Moving on to part 2 of the bill. This is on general principles and values. Subject to this act, the following guiding values and principles shall apply to the actions of all persons, juristic persons, institutions, and all government agencies, where those actions significantly apply to climate change management. So, moving on to the guiding values and principles, we need to build resilience, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, acknowledge that we have common but differentiated responsibilities amongst the communities, among the society, also at global level, amongst us as a developing country and the developed countries. Mainstreaming of climate change into social and economic development plans, programs, projects, and budgets. Already the Minister of Finance is taking it up, and they call upon all the ministries, departments, and agencies to mainstream climate change in planning and budgeting, which they monitor very closely as a result of the need to ensure our budgeting is guided also by climate change. But this was ongoing before we had any form of legislation that is in place. Cooperate and collaborate for climate action at all levels of government, including provincial and local authorities. Apply the precautionary approach in principle. Pay special attention to sensitive, vulnerable, and highly dynamic and stressed ecosystems. Furthermore, on the next slide, take into account the needs of the most vulnerable areas and people. Acknowledge the role of traditional knowledge, science, and evidence and information. Apply the polluter pays principle for destroying the climate system. Promote integrity, transparency, and accountability in the management of climate change. Then promotion of public awareness, training, and education, and ensuring access to climate information. And then promotion of equity, climate justice, and just transition. So the guiding values and principles shall only serve as the general framework within which plans, policies, and strategies for climate change management shall be formulated, and serve as guidelines for the exercise of any function concerning climate change in terms of this Act or any other enactment, and guide the interpretation, administration, and implementation of any law concerning climate change. Moving on to part 3 of the bill, it talks about the functions of the minister responsible for climate change. The functions of the minister responsible for climate change will include regulating the management of climate change and ozone layer protection, and promotion, coordination, and monitoring of climate change and ozone layer protection. Regulate the activities of all government agencies and other agencies to the extent that their activities impact on climate change and ozone layer depletion. Promote institutional collaboration that mainstreams climate change into urban and rural planning, infrastructure, and service delivery. Lay before Parliament a report on the state of climate change and ozone layer protection every 5 years. Furthermore, the minister responsible for climate change will recommend which international and regional conventions on climate change and ozone layer protection Zimbabwe should become a party to, and to secure the incorporation of such conventions into domestic law. In accordance with the appropriate law and in consultation with the minister responsible for finance, grant incentives as may be necessary. This may include issues to do with the importation of solar components, solar products, IT, in order for us to transition from the new usage of conventional forms of energy into the renewable forms of energy, which, if they are too exorbitant, they may not attract buy-in. Also, the minister will promote and facilitate cooperation and collaboration in sharing of data among stakeholders. This is expressed and enunciated in the Paris Agreement, where we have to comply with that agreement that we need to be very transparent in our reporting to the United Nations. So the minister shall have such powers as are necessary to carry out these duties. Let me move on to part 3. This is administrative provisions of the Climate Change Management Department. The Act establishes the Climate Change Management Department within the ministry responsible for climate change management. It's in existence already, but on the date of commencement of this Act, it shall be the body responsible for implementing this Act. The department shall be responsible for the administration, implementation, and coordination of national climate change policies, plans, strategies, and actions, and report to the minister. The department shall decentralize to all provincial and district levels. Currently, is operating at the head office only. Then it establishes also the Climate Transparency and Compliance Unit, which shall perform the following duties and functions: data collection and archiving of data on mitigation actions, climate finance, and adaptation actions to inform climate change response measures. This unit shall serve as the National Knowledge and Information Management Hub or Management Center. Develop and maintain the online climate transparency portal where all information on climate change shall be deposited and accessible by all. Develop an inventory of national greenhouse gas emissions by sources and removals by sinks. Ensure the harmonization of methodologies and scientific tools. Develop stakeholder capacity on greenhouse gas measurement, reporting, and verification. A national ozone unit also is established in the bill, which has been operating guided by statutory instrument. Um, and this national ozone unit will be responsible for implementing regulations related to ozone depleting substances and implementation of the phase down and phase out of ozone depleting substance programs, training, capacity building, and awareness on ozone layer protection, data collection, archiving, and sharing of data on ozone depleting substances and greenhouse gas emissions. And finally, manage and fulfill Zimbabwe's ozone related reporting requirements under international and regional obligations. Another unit that is very critical, which will be established, will be the loss and damage unit. You know, we are being impacted negatively by the extreme climate change related events. We lose lives, we lose infrastructure, we lose livestock, among others. So this unit will be responsible for collection, archiving, and sharing of data on losses and damages due to climate change related natural disasters and other events, and the formulation of framework plans in anticipation of such losses and damages as are foreseeable, and also mobilization of international and domestic resources for the purpose of remediating and mitigating such losses and damages. The bill also establishes a carbon trading unit. The carbon trading unit, to be known as the Zimbabwe Carbon Markets Authority, shall be responsible for promoting, building capacity, and raising awareness on carbon trading, and maintain the Zimbabwe Carbon Registry, register and monitor all carbon trading projects operating in Zimbabwe, ensure the environmental integrity of carbon credits, promote the development of carbon credits, standardized baselines and methodologies for Zimbabwe, provide a mechanism for effective adherence to confidentiality of data and information, transparency, accountability, monitoring and evaluation of mitigation and sustainable development efforts. Carbon trading has not been new to Zimbabwe, but has been unknown in Zimbabwe because it was privy to just a few individuals who have been benefiting on carbon trading in Zimbabwe with resources which were accrued, not even flowing back into the country, but being spent elsewhere. So the carbon trading unit will be very critical to ensure that we retain as much as we can with respect to proceeds from carbon trading. I move on to the officers and the inspectors. For better performance of the department, there shall be climate change officers, licensing officers, or any other officers to carry out such duties considers necessary for the purposes of this Act, or inspectors as it considers necessary to carry out inspections and ensure the proper monitoring of compliance with the provisions of this Act. Where an act or an inspector is responsible in suspicion that an offense against this Act is being or has been or is threatened to be committed, shall have the power to enter the said premises for the purposes of preventing harm to the climate and ozone layer. An officer or an inspector may, 7, order in writing on the owner, user, or occupier of any equipment or premises requiring that owner, user, or occupier to take such measures as may be specified. So moving on to part 4 of the Climate Change Management Bill, which is on operations of the Climate Change Management Department. We start off with national reporting. The department shall be responsible for national reporting and complying with international reporting obligations on climate change and ozone layer protection. The department shall cause to be prepared and delivered to the minister for his or her review reports that are in line with Zimbabwe's regional and international commitments. Honorable members, international commitments are becoming a major problem. We face punitive measures, unilateral trade barriers if we do not go green. As most of you may be aware that the European Union has already established a tax on all products that are heavily produced, heavily dependent on fossil fuels. Already they include cement, fertilizers, aluminium, iron, oil, steel, among others. They've got about 7 products, which, if they are heavily dependent on fossil fuels, including coal, for their production, they attract a heavy penalty when they are imported or exported to the EU, and making them uncompetitive on the EU oil market. And there's already an outcry from a lot of countries globally about this tax, but it's already in existence. So this may even extend to livestock production itself. Then I move on to public and stakeholder engagement. Within a period of 12 months of coming into effect of this act, the department shall prepare and publish a public and stakeholder engagement strategy that sets out the following: modalities for raising awareness and informing the public about the climate, identifying actions and encouraging the public to contribute to the achievement of the objectives of the strategies, plans, and actions, and identify actions which the public may take to contribute to the achievement of the objectives of this act. The public engagement strategy shall be subject to review from time to time. Then, on the register of licenses and permits, the department shall maintain a register of all greenhouse gas emissions, ozone and carbon trading licenses, permits, or authorizations that may be issued under this act. The register shall be a public document and may be inspected at any reasonable hour at any premises of the department on the payment of the prescribed fee or on the department's website. Then we move on to the greenhouse gas emission data collection, verification, and compilation. This is very critical because in order for us to assess and know our carbon footprint, how much we are emitting, and to identify areas for potential interventions in order for us to remain on the same level with the global dynamics, we need to know how much we are emitting. This is to do with the greenhouse gas emissions, which are from the energy sector, industry, waste sector, agriculture, and forestry sectors, among other sectors. We need all that information to be collected, collated, and archived. All information and reports, the department shall employ specified persons to make regular returns in the prescribed form and manner to the department. The minister may, by notice, publish in the government gazette, require any person to provide within a reasonable time or on a regular basis any data, information, documents, samples, or materials to the department that are reasonably required for fulfilling Zimbabwe's reporting requirements under the relevant international instruments. Furthermore, the data and information shall be in a standard format in line with the prescribed requirements and shall be requested among other data as may be appropriate to the data and information provider. The following: data and information on mitigation, vulnerability, and adaptation to the impacts of climate change. Data and information, climate change, financing flows, and expenditure. Data and information on emissions and removals of targeted greenhouse gases, and data and information on ozone depleting substances, and data and information related to carbon trading. On measurement of these emissions, for the purposes of compiling the National Greenhouse Gas Inventory, the targeted greenhouse gas emissions, the reductions of those targeted greenhouse gas emissions and their removals shall be measured or calculated in tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, taking into account the following: the amount of greenhouse gas emissions and the removal of the greenhouse gases for a period that shall be determined every 2 years or any other prescribed period. The measurement of the targets, emissions, removals, and net emissions shall be calculated in accordance with the approved guidelines. Data sharing agreements. The department may enter into data sharing agreements with public entities and the private sector for the preparation of national reports. For purposes of coordination and effective data collection, contact persons to coordinate climate change management issues. Notwithstanding anything contained in this section, the provision of data is subject to existing national laws on access to information where applicable. Then, establishment of a national emissions trading system and levy. The department shall, in collaboration with the Environmental Management Agency and relevant stakeholders, prescribe greenhouse gas emission thresholds. Before establishing the greenhouse gas emission standards, specified entities who may become subject to greenhouse gas emission standards shall be required to make regular returns to the department. The department, through regulations, shall provide a methodology for the precise quantification of the threshold of the greenhouse gas emissions relevant to the subject matter. I would like to highlight the fact that under the Paris Agreement, Zimbabwe has an obligation to reduce our emissions of these greenhouse gases by 40% per capita by the year 2030. And in order to do so, we need both public and private entities to ensure that they contribute towards this reduction. The government has already started, and through the ministry, to demonstrate some energy and water use efficiency audits, and then come up with an improvement plan, knowing the baseline of emissions in an entity and how much we are losing in terms of energy because of our inefficient water uses and energy uses, as well as the gases that we use in refrigeration and air conditioning, how we are transiting to new gases. Then once you have established a carbon footprint, then you can tell by how much you would also have reduced in terms of these gases once you implement the improvement plan. So this is to do with this section. Then furthermore, under the National Emissions Trading System, a statutory gas emission threshold shall avail the following option: any person exceeding this threshold, the purchase of carbon credits in the manner specified. If you cannot meet your specified obligation of that part of emission reductions that you intend to carry out, you shall be called upon to purchase carbon credits from another entity that may be having more credits because they are doing much more with respect to emission reductions than we trade amongst ourselves. So, in the absence of the purchase of a carbon credit for any reason, the person exceeding such a threshold shall be liable to a levy in accordance with the provisions of the Finance Act. Then we move on to technology development, innovation, and transfer. In consultation with the minister responsible for finance and other relevant government agencies, may facilitate the import, uptake, and application of technologies for low carbon and climate resilient development. The department may collaborate with private sector, public entities, research institutions, and development partners, or other local, regional, or international entities to facilitate innovation and development of low carbon and climate resilient technologies. Furthermore, the minister may formulate regulations on low carbon and climate resilient technology development, innovation, and transfer. We move on to the control of ozone depleting substances, greenhouse gases, and equipment. The minister, in consultation with other relevant ministers, shall formulate regulations for the prohibition or control of ozone depleting substances, greenhouse gases, ozone depleting substances dependent equipment, and greenhouse gas dependent equipment. Already we have the minimum energy performance standards for domestic and industrial appliances, which shall need to be supported by the law, especially when it comes to the importation of this equipment. The minister also the regulations shall apply to importers, exporters, and producers and consumers of ozone depleting substances and greenhouse gases, and ozone depleting substances and greenhouse gas dependent equipment that will be prescribed by the ministers. Under this, no person shall import into Zimbabwe any prescribed or listed substances and equipment or appliance which uses or whose function relies on the prescribed substances. These regulations shall provide for the following matters: prohibited substances and equipment, import and export licenses, processing of applications, suspension, cancellation and amendment of licenses, register of licensed importers and exporters, returns to be furnished by licensed importers, exporters or consumers, labeling and packaging, list of prohibited ozone depleting substances, controlled substances, and ozone dependent equipment. We may want to know whether this is very critical, but if you may recall the World Cup, which was held in Qatar, they air conditioned all their stadia. All of them, the stadiums there, they were air conditioned, but with equipment that will be banned in 2030. By 2028, actually, all that refrigeration and air conditioning equipment in their stadiums in Qatar will be decommissioned, because the the gases used are already considered to be redundant and heavily causing global warming through their emissions. So we may need to have control in our country. We may be having similar projects, programs of national nature that would require this level of air conditioning and even refrigeration that may be impacted by these multilateral environmental agreements. Then we move on to the formation of liaison committees. The minister, on his or her own initiative or on the recommendation of the department, may, after consultation with the relevant ministries, form one or more liaison committees consisting of representatives of the department and representatives of one or more of the following entities: Environmental Management Agency, Parks and Wildlife Authority, Forestry Commission, Zimbabwe National Water Authority, Research Council of Zimbabwe, Zimbabwe Energy Regulatory Authority, Radiation Protection Authority of Zimbabwe, Rural Electrification Fund, Department of Civil Protection, meteorological services, and any other relevant institutions. The minister may issue a directive prescribing the mandate and procedure of each liaison committee constituted in terms of the subsection. Then we move on to part 5 of the Climate Change Management Bill. It's the establishment of the National Climate Change Fund. The fund is placed under the legal custody and authority of the minister responsible for climate change, meaning the minister acts as the trustee who must ensure the money is used properly and for its intended purposes. While the minister has overall responsibility, the daily administration and management of the fund is handled by the accounting officer of the ministry responsible for climate change management. Objects of the fund. The fund intends to fund climate change mitigation and adaptation programs and projects, assist with co-financing mechanisms to unlock climate financing. Of late, any multilateral funding mechanisms, in order for us to access the resources, they want to know how much you as a country are also putting into this project. Without identifying and stipulating the co-financing, the projects may not attract or may not be approved by the financial windows, even at bilateral level. So the fund intends also to assist with funds for project preparation, capacity building, and technology development and transfer. It will also provide grants to local authorities or other public entities to support their climate change programs and projects in adaptation or mitigation. They conduct assessments of climate change impact in Zimbabwe. And it will also assist in prioritization and foster gender mainstreaming, equity, inclusivity, and other vulnerable groups. Promotion of public awareness, which is very critical, information sharing, data sharing, and access to information on climate change. The funds also intend to avail funds to avert and minimize loss and damage, which I mentioned earlier on, associated with the adverse impacts of climate change. The bill proposes that the sources of the funds will include 15% climate change levies, 85% share of proceeds from the carbon market proceeds, 25% of carbon tax contributions, 25% of tobacco levy, parliamentary appropriations, donations, financial assistance, loans, and grants. Any monies that may invest in or accrue to the fund, whether in terms of this act or otherwise. So this diagram just shows us the climate finance flows into the fund, as I have already mentioned, which will be used for various projects on climate change adaptation and climate change mitigation. We'll move on to the next slide. The fund transparency requirements. The department responsible for climate change management must publish a portfolio of projects as well as a pipeline of projects under the fund, including the income and expenditure of those activities or projects. The department shall establish a mechanism for monitoring and evaluation of programs, projects, and activities funded by resources from the fund. Whilst the minister responsible for climate change management, in consultation with the department, shall establish regulations and standard operating procedures outlining how activities or project proponents will access the fund. The minister shall also annually prepare and lay before Parliament a statement of income and expenditure of the fund, including the projects and activities supported by the fund. On the books of accounts and audit, the minister shall ensure proper financial records are maintained for transparency and accountability. Ensure annual financial statements are prepared without delay. Ensure that accounts of the fund are audited by the Auditor General. Then moving on to part 6 of the bill. This is on climate change obligations and duties. I start by talking about the public sector climate change duties. Each ministry, department, and agency or local authority shall support sectors to include climate change adaptation in their plans, policies, strategies, and budgets, and ensure they follow carbon emission reduction targets in line with national climate plans. The minister must promote the signing of agreements between government entities and the Department on data collection, processing, and sharing on greenhouse gas emissions for compilation of the national inventory of these gases. The minister, in consultation with other relevant ministers, can impose duties on public entities or agencies relating to climate change. Climate change focal officers. Every MDA and all local authorities shall no later than 6 months from date of commencement of this act appoint a member of its staff to be a climate change focal officer. Information coordination. This will serve as the channel for submitting climate change data and information. So the officers shall also ensure that the communication links with the department are open. They will facilitate communication and coordination between the department and the respective ministry, local authority, or entity. With respect to mainstreaming of climate change, the officer will be the entry point and assisting to unpack the climate change mainstreaming strategy for the entities. So it shall promote the integration of climate change into policy strategies and development plans and budgets. And will coordinate the implementation of climate change adaptation and mitigation recommendations in their respective entities. There shall be provincial councils, metropolitan councils, provincial councils, metropolitan councils, and local authorities have also duties to play within the Climate Change Management Act. Provincial councils, metropolitan councils, and local authorities shall assess and identify climate change risks, vulnerabilities, and measures to mitigate and adapt to climate change, and develop a climate change response plan which sets out measures and actions to respond to the risks and needs identified in this subsection, and include climate change response measures into existing planning instruments and budgets, and submit an annual report by the 31st of December every year, and promote the participation of citizens in management of climate change. Then, on climate change duties for private entities, the minister, in consultation with the department, may impose climate change obligations and duties on private entities, including measures to reduce the annual carbon emission reduction targets. Private entities to designate a climate change officer or an environmental or sustainability officer who shall be responsible for submitting all reports as required in terms of this act. To prepare reports on the status of the performance of its climate change obligations and prescribe the period for reporting, and cooperating in the development and application of climate-friendly technologies. Then I move on to the general provisions of the bill, which is part 7. I start by looking at the offenses under the bill. Offenses under the bill are committed when an individual, institution, or government agency fail to comply with lawful instructions, obstruct climate officers or inspectors in discharge of duties, provide false or misleading information to members of the department, exceed the greenhouse gas emission thresholds prescribed at any given time under this bill. This will be followed by some penalties, and the penalties will be applied to the aforementioned offenses. The severity of penalties depend on the impact on the climate system, environment, and the health or well-being of citizens. The monetary benefits accrued also by the convicted person committing the offense. There will be financial fines not exceeding level, which is 5,000 United States dollars for violations. Possible imprisonment not exceeding 5 years in serious cases. Directors or managers may be held personally liable. Partnerships and organizations may face prosecution. Then the regulatory powers enunciated in the bill, the minister is empowered to issue regulations. The regulations may provide for monitoring, reporting, and verification, the allocation and determination of greenhouse gas emission targets to persons and related planning requirements, the imposition of a financial levy after consultation with the minister responsible for finance, the imposition of a penalty to persons who undertake activities in contravention of this Act, the form and content of any climate change responsible plans required to be developed by local and provincial authorities, and the participation in carbon trading and the establishment of emission trading schemes. Still on the regulatory powers, regulations may also provide for the delegation of functions or powers established under this Act, any other matter required under this Act or any other law. The regulations may also provide for the mechanisms and procedures required to implement Zimbabwe's international obligations, the development of national greenhouse gases, the content and signing of data sharing agreements and memorandum of understanding. Period for individuals or companies currently using non-compliant equipment or technologies to upgrade and meet the new climate-friendly standards. Then on incentives for promotion of climate change initiatives, the minister shall, in accordance with the appropriate law and in consultation with the minister responsible for finance, grant such incentives as may be necessary for the advancement of climate change adaptation and mitigation actions to persons, emissions, and adoption of emission reduction technologies. Support climate change adaptation initiatives, conduct accredited training in programs aimed, and the minister shall prescribe the and the Paris Agreement, the Kyoto Protocol. We also have the Montreal Protocol that governs ozone depleting substances. So where the government is not yet party to an international climate change instrument, the minister may recommend to Parliament to ratify or accede to the instrument. Finally, looking at public participation, every ministry, department, and agency at every level shall promote public participation when developing climate change plans, policies, strategies, regulations, programs, and projects in terms of this Act. The department or other government authorities shall organize public consultations to allow interested persons, stakeholders, or communities to express their views on any proposed regulations or plans. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shakata, for such a comprehensive presentation. I'm sure we can give him another round of applause. Honorable members, this is a bit technical bill, but I'm sure he has done justice. This is a bill to set a comprehensive framework for our national response to climate change issues, the coordination among the various government departments, the issues of funding. It is also setting up a fund. So I'll allow Mr. Dias, I'm sure he has got a few comments to make on this bill as well. Over to you, Mr. Dias.
Thank you. I must thank Mr. Jakata. He's left me with nothing to say. But I would just maybe add a few words of praise to his department, his ministry, the stakeholders, and my colleague who drafted this bill who wasn't able to present it. What a great job they've done. They've really done a great job. I would want every country on earth to adopt this statutory framework. It is so robust, it is so clear. What is more, it'll be a magnet for experts and funds to come to our country because we've furnished them with the statutory tools, the administrative tools to do their work on data collection, climate mitigation, everything. It's in this bill. There's a compliance unit, there's a carbon trading unit. If we are to implement it as it is intended, which I'm sure we will, this will be a model for everyone, even the developed world. Just last week I heard the British Environmental Management Agency, for the first time, is going to give police powers to their inspectors. And I was amazed, but didn't they have them before? All the time that agency has been in existence since 1992, they never had police powers, but our bill has them. And our EMA has them. So maybe they looked at our bill and said, there's something missing here. Let's follow Zimbabwe. So, honestly, you've left me with nothing to say, Mr. Yokata. Thank you.
Thank you. Indeed, the presentation by Mr. Shakata was comprehensive, and I indicated that he covered almost everything. So I was wondering what Mr. Dias was going to say after the first presentation. Thank you, Mr. Dias, for those comments. He's actually saying we are setting a model law for the world. So we expect others to come and learn from us. Allow me to invite Mrs. M. Chitando. She's an expert in climate change and energy issues in ZELO, which is Zimbabwe Environmental Law Organization. So she'll give us some views on the bill. We can give a round of applause as she joins the podium.
Good morning, honorable members. Allow me to ride on the protocol that's already been observed and established. My name is Michelle Chitando. I'm a legal officer and I lead the climate change and energy program at the Zimbabwe Environmental Law Organization, or ZELO for short. Thank you to Chief Director and thank you to Honorable Dias for the presentation that was very comprehensive, very elaborate, indicating where we are, the strides we're taking as a country around dealing with issues of climate change in Zimbabwe. Just as an introductory note, ZELO formerly was known as ZELA, but we are now registered as a private voluntary organization, and we work to promote natural resource protection in Zimbabwe. We have 5 program areas that are shown on the slides. Part of them include the climate change and energy program, which are very critical to the discussion that we're having today. My presentation really is to bring the civil society perspective on this very important bill dealing with issues of climate change. Zimbabwe as a country has already shown its commitment in addressing issues of climate change. This is through the international and national commitments we've made through the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the Paris Agreement, and the Kyoto Protocol that have already been mentioned by the presenters ahead of me. At the national level, we have several policies, laws, and strategies related to climate change, which include the supreme law of the country, which is the Constitution of Zimbabwe, the Environmental Management Act, our national climate policy, our national renewable energy policy, the long-term greenhouse gas emission strategy, and the nationally determined contributions, which we commend our country for being one of the countries to submit its NDC 3.0. Despite all these good efforts, what has been missing through participating in the consultative processes that took place before the public hearings, this was meant to get as much stakeholder input before the bill came to be gazetted. I will now go into the key provisions of the bill, just highlighting from a civil society perspective what we see are strides that will take us in helping us to mitigate and adapt to climate change. As already been indicated, critical. We see that the bill articulates clearly in the objectives the need to provide an institutional framework to coordinate, supervise, regulate, manage, and mainstream all activities related to climate change. The objectives are also clear in ensuring that Zimbabwe develops and implements programs for achieving long-term goals on climate change, mitigation, and adaptation. Finally, I think this is an objective M. You will find that our bill provides for the domestication and implementation of provisions of international conventions, agreements, and protocols related to climate change. These are key areas, especially considering that the different policies and strategies we had for climate change were quite fragmented. With the bill coming into place and tying all this together and highlighting the need for a coordinated effort around this, this is a key stride. The bill is also grounded in the Constitution. This is a key element considering that any law that is subsidiary to the Constitution must be consistent with the Constitution. The bill builds on fundamentals in the Constitution through Clause 5, which provides for every person having a right to access information related to climate change, to participate in the implementation and promulgation of legislative policy, and to also benefit from climate change programs and promote sustainable development. As I've mentioned earlier, the processes for everyone to participate, highlighting the necessity for public participation has already been done. And even after the bill becomes a law, there are still aspects that build on the fundamentals of the Constitution, where any information to be requested can be accessed through the rights articulated within the bill. The bill is also key on highlighting roles and responsibilities in managing climate change in Zimbabwe. We know that different stakeholders are working on different aspects and everyone has a different role to play. Therefore, the bill creates institutions and defines clearly their roles and mandates in fighting climate change through adaptation and mitigation actions. This is found in Clause 7. Again, this has already been articulated very well by Mr. Shakata. The bill establishes a climate transparency and compliance unit, a national ozone unit, a loss and damage unit, a carbon trading unit. I'd like to make reference particularly to the loss and damage unit, which is a commendable step in addressing the urgency of climate-induced loss and damage in Zimbabwe. Loss and damage remains a key issue, and given the increase in the intensification intensification of climate change related disasters, this would be a key area that other countries learn from our bill here in Zimbabwe. On data sharing agreements, the bill is clear on the need for data sharing agreements between public entities and the private sector for the preparation of national reports. In order for us to meet our climate commitments, it is necessary to foster collaboration, drive innovation, and have better and informed decision-making through these agreements. I think climate data has been an issue that has not been clearly shared or easily shared among the different entities that would contribute to what we're pushing for as a country. So data sharing agreements make the ease of reporting for the necessary departments and meeting our climate commitments. Again, the formation of liaison committees around dealing with climate change from the different stakeholders is clearly articulated in the bill. The Environmental Management Agency, Parks and Wildlife, Forestry, for example, the Rural Electrification Fund, the Department of Civil Protection are some of the liaison committees that the bill highlights. This is very important, again, as we've indicated that climate change requires all hands on deck and the different stakeholders working on these issues. A key development, again, is the National Climate Fund. It is established in terms of clauses 25 and 26, and this fund is aimed at funding climate change mitigation and adaptation programs, which will help assist in unlocking climate finance, which is needed to deal with these issues that we've been speaking about, that we've been seeing in our day-to-day lives, and assisting with project preparation that is related to issues of climate change. Another key consideration and a key area that we would like to commend within the bill is related to the environmental impact assessments and having climate change considerations being added into that. As we all know, the Environmental Management Act still needs some reform considering the contemporary changes that have happened in our context. Clause 31 provides clearly that the mainstreaming of climate change by every institution, both public, private, that exercise functions that affect or are affected by climate change, shall integrate climate change in their policies, plans, budgets, and decisions. We've seen this especially with a lot of development happening in the country. It is now very important for these projects at every level to consider the impact of climate change and have these areas being considered in how they do their work. Incentives for the promotion of climate change are also included in the bill, which is a welcome development. We know that anyone who is doing anything contrary that would contribute to climate change would be subject to some form of punitive measure. But it is important to also commend those that are spurring innovation or cleaner practices that would promote adoption of cleaner practices or to grant such incentives through this particular provision. This might and would accelerate technology adoption. I will now quickly move on to recommendations, which I will also call opportunities that rise from this bill. Once this bill is passed, the work doesn't stop there. The bill makes reference, for example, to the just transition in its objectives. Whilst there's no definition for a just transition within our bill, it is an opportunity for us to define as a country what we mean by the just transition, depending on what our context is and what is specific to our economy. This would be very crucial, especially considering different countries are at different levels around this, but through our bill, we're able to define what works for Zimbabwe based off of our context. Again, after the bill is passed, at a point where we need to look at how the different mechanisms are coming into the climate fund, National Climate Fund, are geared to consider how important this fund is. Again, in an effort to consider ease of doing business, the bill highlights the regulations related to carbon trading, which is a key area that is going to be covered by the bill. There is also need to consider some of the fees around carbon markets and carbon trading, which could promote more investments into the sector. In conclusion, I'd like to say that Zimbabwe has demonstrated a strong and consistent commitment to tackling issues of climate change through its participation in key international frameworks and development of comprehensive national laws, policies, and strategies. These efforts reflect a clear recognition of the urgency of climate action and a willingness to align with global and domestic priorities. Zimbabwe has a strong foundation for the enactment of a climate change law, and the bill is a critical step in terms of setting the frameworks for addressing climate change. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Michelle, for all those positive comments on the bill and also some recommendations at the end. In the interest of time, allow me to invite Dr. Dingani Stole. He is an expert from the private sector. We can give him a round of applause.